Good afternoon, everybody. Just going to give it a couple of minutes for people to join the seminar, but while we do that, before I introduce Martin, just wanted to give you a quick update with the IOSM Wales branch. We've successfully recruited 3 new committee members, so I'd like to welcome on board Sam Mitchell, Yasmin Royce and Alan to the group. So they've joined us over the last couple of months to booster the Health and Safety Committee for the IOSM Wales branch. So we really welcome them on board. I'd like to introduce you to today's guest speaker, Martin. And I've got a little synopsis to read out. During Martin's presentation, if you have any questions, if you wouldn't mind popping them in the webinar chat, and what I'll do at the end of the meeting then, I'll read them out to Martin so he's not distracted during his presentation, and Martin can answer them then at the end of the meeting. So really excited today. Martin's a really well-spoken advocate of mental health and well-being. Having listened to his presentations before, very passionate, and we're really grateful to have Martin to share some of his experiences and his knowledge and understanding of mental health and well-being in organisations. Martin's passion for mental health stems from his own personal journey and a tragic suicide of a close friend and committee member of his local football club, Trevelyan Boys and Girls Club. Following this tragedy, Martin was appointed mental health officer of the club, which is the first in Wales to appoint a mental health officer. So fantastic. Martin started delivering awareness sessions to the club members, which then led him to reaching over 1,500 people across 25 sports clubs and community projects, as well as opening a wellbeing hub at the Ynys. Professionally, in March 2023, Martin was honoured to be appointed Tata Steel's UK's first ever mental health and wellbeing advisor, tasked with promoting positive mental health and breaking the stigma in a heavy industry setting. Springfield Advisory allows Martin to continue this work, passionate approach to the business community. So on that note, I'd like to welcome Martin and hope you enjoy the seminar. Like I said, any questions you've got, pop them in the chat and I'll read them out later on. Diolch, thank you. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you very much for the kind words, and thank you all for firstly inviting me along to present today, but also giving up some time to listen to some of my thoughts on improving workplace well-being. As Steve sort of mentioned, in the last 12 months, I've set up my own organisation called Springfield Advisory. We're now working with numerous businesses right across Wales, South Wales and Wales. Here's just a couple that we are partnered up with and working regularly. So MECTEC Professionals are a large recruitment agency based in Caerphilly. JES Group Engineering, Filtronics, they're manufacturing. We're working with a local gym. Food production, haulage, recycling, a legal firm, local authority. So as you can just see there, as part of Springfield, we're working right across lots of different sectors. And I think later on in my talk, that kind of message carries on. So I just wanted to start today with some workplace wellbeing statistics that I've gathered from the Mental Health Foundation and Mental Health First Aid Wales. So we all know that mental health and well-being in the workplace is a huge issue and a very hot topic at the moment. There's been a massive shift in the dial, over the last couple of years, but I think there's still a long way to go. And some of these up-to-date, the most recent stats really sort of confirm that. So, in 2023, there were 875,000 employees suffering from work-related stress, depression, or anxiety. So that's a huge number. And that's just ticking off that work-related stress box. Obviously, health and safety, stress risk assessments will show all this, but that's a huge category there and a huge number. Again, powerful figures here. 17.1 million working days were lost in the UK due to mental health issues. 25% of UK workers report feeling unable to cope with workplace stress. Quite a scary figure, actually. So we talk about 1 in 4 of us will suffer from mental health issues. We're at that 1 in 4 there who are unable to cope with workplace stress. 79% of employees experiencing moderate to high levels of stress, with women and younger people showing higher levels. Now, that's a very interesting stat. Obviously, we're at Men's Mental Health Month, and obviously International Men's Day last week. There's a lot of talk around men's mental health, and sometimes, the women and the younger people in this topic get forgotten. So that's a really high ratio and percentage there of employees, women and younger people showing higher levels. So these stats have come from, Mental Health First Aid, Mental Health Foundation, a lot of big studies they've done. But I think that just shows the scope of the issue we face within well-being in the workplace. So Julie, if you wouldn't mind just flipping over to the slide. Apologies, guys, we've had some technical problems, so Julie's going to have to share my slides. And from some of my, work that I've done within Tata, within the community, and now working across lots of different businesses, I believe that there's 5 really strong and important pillars that will help to improve workplace well-being. And once you start establishing these pillars, that's when you get that nice strong foundation to underpin culture, attitudes, behaviours of your workforce, and then they become empowered and they start improving their own workplace well-being. So for me, these 5 really important pillars are the environment, the engagement, the leaders, the approach, and the support. So I'm going to go into these in a bit more detail. But once you start working along these 5 pillars of improving this workplace well-being, as I said, that's where you get your real strong foundations to build everything else off that and start running your campaigns, your initiative. But you've got to work on these 5 first and making these really strong base. So Julie, if you don't mind again. So we go to the first one and we're talking about the environment. So when we talk about the environment, we don't mean the physical environment, because as I sort of explained there, I work a lot across lots of different sectors. So it's not where we work, it's how we work, and we mean the work and environment. So that means the culture, the attitude, breaking down some of the stigma and some communication. So I look to expand on culture. That's got to be a real open door policy around the culture. Not one of fear about speaking up about mental health, or one of punishment, or one of stopping progression, or one of, not supporting. It needs to be a supportive culture where people feel comfortable to go and talk about their mental health. And people can stay in work with their mental health if we set the right culture. So hopefully some of those stats will come down around sickness and absence. When we talk about attitude, it's a huge conversation piece around attitude around mental health, from management to work colleagues to family members. And once we start looking and starting working towards an open-minded attitude, which is really positive, which looks for solutions and provides support, that's where we really find that attitude change and that shift in that dial that I mentioned earlier. And again, we're talking about stigma. Stigma is still the biggest issue preventing people talking about their mental health. Huge amounts of work, again, breaking down that stigma, from celebrities coming out offering quotes to people sharing stories within workplaces. I've shared my story now to nearly 5,000 people across community projects and workplaces, but there's still that stigma there that people are frightened to talk it down. So, we have to break that down. And again, that's about support and not punishing. That people feel they can come and talk about their problems as early as possible within the workplace. And there's lots of ways we can do that, but that depends on your organisation, it depends how it's structured. But if we start at the bottom, we start breaking that down early, that's where we can encourage conversation. I've been with a customer this morning, a large manufacturing company within Swansea this morning, delivered a talk to 60 of their workforce before their morning shift at 5:30 this morning. That was around my personal story. At the end of that story, 5 people hang back to have a conversation about their mental health. So that's about showing people, the famous saying that it's okay not to be okay really does matter. So once we start normalizing mental health and we start talking about it, breaking that stigma down, that's where we'll create that. And also on the back of the culture, the attitude and the stigma is the communication. In all works of forms of work, communication is key, but especially in mental health and well-being. And all your communication has to be a clear, positive message. through as many channels as we like, because there's lots of stuff that we put out digitally now, and we put out via Teams, and we put out via digital notice boards. But that doesn't mean we cover all our workforce. From my work in Tata, there was nothing wrong with our old-fashioned poster and going out to speak to people about events and going to speak to people about initiatives. Sometimes we forget about the old-fashioned ways, and some of our workforce who can't operate the mobile phone and can't access emails because those people are still in our places of work. So we need to make sure our communication reaches through as many channels as possible. And also not forgetting any part of our workforce is really important. Again, from experience, a lot of messages would go to senior management and then maybe down to line managers or shift managers, team leaders, whichever organisation you're in. But then that message would stop there at their meetings because other things become more important, like production, like staffing levels. So we need to really make sure that our messages, come all the way down the channel, right the way through to all members of our staff. And then if we move on then to engagement, employee engagement is absolutely key to improving any workplace well-being. An engaged workforce will organically drive any projects forward. And once you try to introduce the workplace well-being, it will only hit barriers and obstacles if you don't encourage your employees from the outset. Because once you start engaging them in an inclusive way, which empowers them, gives them ownership, and is purposeful, you'll get everybody on board. And when you start looking at setting up some initiatives I talk about later on, it's really key to get everybody involved. So we're not telling them what they need to do. Some of the programs I look at is like an umbrella approach where we provide the resource, but the actual work departments or shifts or sites run their own workplace well-being within a structure. So then they have the freedom to work around whichever work area they work in and what sort of people they work with as well. So that's a real key one for me, is sort of, getting people engaged as early as possible. So again, Julie, if we could just go over. If we could just go to the next slide, please, Julie.
Apologies, I'm having some technical
No,
issues myself here. Here we go. Sorry.
That's okay. Don't worry. Okay, so when we're talking about engagement and getting people involved, it's really key. And if we can, if it's possible, to set up some employee-based focus groups so employees have a voice and they have their opinion of how things work in their work area. Some employee-led working parties, leave employees take ownership on this, because all this is going to do is form a more positive culture and increase and improve your workplace well-being. Run some workshops in the work areas. Don't just put things on in boardrooms and in conference rooms. Go out to work areas. When I worked at Tata again, there's a huge thing about shifts. We can't speak to the people on shifts. Well, I went and delivered sessions, standing outside the blast furnace, standing outside the hot mill, cold mill in these areas, talking to the guys when they're on shift. And all that does engages, increases familiarity. Open days, get lots of agencies inside, talk about different topics, internal speakers. There's lots of people talking about mental health. There's lots of charities who are going to come out. Look what's in your community. Look what peer support groups are out there. Look what training is available, mental health first aid, mental health awareness. There's a plethora of stuff available at the moment. And that's the way to engage people. So engagement is really important around improving your mental health and well-being. And again, Julie, please. So, one of the really key, important, probably the most important pillar in improving your workplace well-being is the leaders at any level. So whether you're talking at the most senior leader or we're talking at, lower level management, leadership buy-in is so important. When you get your leadership teams invested, it sets an example to the rest of the team. The workplace well-being is important. Without that investment, again, like engagement, any program will struggle to get off the ground. Because if your leaders are not investing, your team also looks at those and thinks, well, it can't be an important part of our workplace if our leaders and our managers are not buying in and they're not invested in it. So why should I? That's what people think. I've done a lot of work around this, and in a previous role, I became the first ever mental health advisor. But getting real management backing was tough. It was a real battle to get them, to come and invest in the programs and set examples. And the investment is not just financials. It's not about their budgets because, people will always say, we haven't got money in the budget. You're going to need them to get involved in some of your events. And again, Julie, if that's okay. You're going to need somebody of a senior level to champion or sponsor the program. You want them to engage in your workforce by attending the events, promoting the activities. I've had one or two senior leaders share some stories, on an open day. That's so powerful. So when you have a chief exec or a managing director or whatever level we are, they're standing there and sharing a story and showing vulnerability, that helps with all those pillars. And you need them to back the program. So you really need to look and maybe signpost one individual in the senior leadership team to try and back you and sponsor you on a program. Towards the end of my time in Tata, I managed to find that person, and we made a huge difference then because we set up things like a wellbeing hub within the workplace where people were allowed to come during shift time where they had their struggles. We had over 100 people within 5 months attend a wellbeing hub sharing their struggles in the last 12 months of my time in Tata. We were going out and allowing to talk to people on the shop floor. And that's all because it got sponsored by a senior leader. So leaders are really, really key to me in how successful you are in improving your workplace well-being. Thanks, Julie. And again, the approach, again, as I say, all these pillars are very, different, but they're all as important as each other. So the approach is about flexibility, within all our workplaces. And if you look at the sectors I cover at the moment, all of them work in very different environments, different hours, different types of people. The job roles are different. So we need to be flexible around this. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to workplace well-being. There has to be a fluid and flexible approach, which means every employee feels supported. Because once you start having a workforce, but some of them feel supported and some don't, you're not becoming fully inclusive then of offering that support across. I've worked with an organisation recently who wanted to run a trial with 40 members of their staff around workplace wellbeing. Now, I was adamant that this wouldn't work because you were cutting out over 50% of their workforce just to do a pilot scheme. But they believed that was the way forward. What do? We alienated the 40 in lots of different ways in the workforce because they were saying, why aren't I good enough to be supported? What if I need my support? Because they weren't part of the pilot scheme. So we need to make sure this fluid approach, and that goes back to engagement, communication, culture, attitude, is flexible right across an organisation. So every employee, from right to the very top to the new starter only started yesterday, feels supported. These will all be determined by the previous pillars, as I said. So how you set that environment, how you create engagement, and your leadership backing. So all these 5 pillars really intertwine with each other. And once you build the foundations of those pillars, as I keep mentioning, that's where you get a strong base. And that's where you're allowed to be flourished, to have some freedom, some creativity, and really strive for excellence in workplace well-being. But more importantly, support your workforce. So the approach, on this one again is really, really important of how we approach our well-being. We shouldn't be telling people how they are supported, it's how they need to be supported. And that support offering very much depends on one, the size of the business, whether we're 5 employees or whether we're 5,000 employees. The type of the business, as you said earlier on, I'm working across from legal sector right into construction. So the support will offer very differently. But what you need to remember when you're offering the support is whether you're a high-level solicitor or somebody working on a production line, 90% of your problems will be the same. It doesn't matter what you do for a living, you'll still suffer with some mental health problems, and they'll still be on the same issues, the same topics. Leadership support, Again, that depends on that as well. And financial investment. Yes, we don't talk about, yes, it's just a financial investment, as I mentioned earlier, but you are going to need some financial backing to run some campaigns, to maybe get people off the shop floor to deliver some workshops, to maybe to get people to stay on another half an hour to listen to a briefing. Again, another customer of mine, I've had to go into the middle of the shift to deliver within the last 2 weeks. Even at the end of a night shift I delivered recently, well, people just want to go home because they don't want to invest the money into delivering during the working time and losing production. So there is some financial commitment needed on this, but I feel there's a lot more around financial investment, around improving your workplace well-being. Thanks, Jim. And again, that every employee can access, and this can vary from lots of different ways depending on those types I talked about earlier. So we're talking about, big employee assistance programs, internal counsellors, mental health first aiders or mental health ambassadors, champions, whichever way we want to look at this. Links into charities which are free, but they still offer fantastic support. And then you're going into full workplace well-being programs and calendars. I also sit with companies where we work through the well-being calendar and we make sure we promote and encourage those events through the year. Again, depending on the size of your organisation, the type of your organisation, depending on your budget and the support, depends what you can offer. But there's so much support out there now that you can offer. It's easy to find a way to offer it, but those 5 pillars, initially setting them up, will allow you to increase this support. Thanks, Joe. And look, I don't talk, like you said, financial impact is not everything, but I think before I kind of come to the end of what my point, trying to make my points and get some reasoning over there, there's some really simple points here, and these are from Deloitte. So an estimated 57.4 billion was lost through presenteeism, sickness, absence, and turnover. Huge figure in our economy. But the really interesting one there is presenteeism. So we have people turning up every day without taking any time off through sickness and absence, struggling with their mental health, struggling to cope with daily life, but struggling to do their job as well, because that culture isn't right, because that support isn't right, and because the environment isn't right. So it's not just about people being off work, it's being distracted, it's being unfocused while they're in work. So then obviously they're just presenting. So that's a huge figure. And as an advocate that somebody goes into workplaces to talk about well-being, this figure for me is kind of like a golden nugget if you want to speak to managers or board directors. For every pound we invest in mental health and well-being support in the workplace, there's a suggested return of £5.30. So there's not bad odds on that really. For every pound we put in, we get over £5 back. People say you can't quantify how much your investment get back around KPIs, and I believe you will struggle around things like KPIs. But if we look at those figures and we can invest the pound, we're saving quite a lot of money around this. Financial impact is important, but for me, more important is the support we're offering our individuals. And again, like we say, working together towards better mental health and well-being is really important. And that means all parts of an organisation working together to provide the support, and all parts of the organisation having an input. So I hope you found that beneficial, guys. Hope you picked up some insight. There's my details, obviously. If you need to reach out, no problem at all. I'll answer some questions, as Steve said, if they're in the chat. If I can't, I'll come back to you. Hopefully you've had some nice insights into workplace well-being from my experiences over the last few years working in industry. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, excellent presentation as always. I think it's really, really, really important and it's be very, very topical. Definitely in the last 5 years, if not before then, since COVID, I think people's realised how important mental health and well-being is, and we all probably know somebody who's either suffered or has got struggling with mental health and well-being. I wonder if you could just share maybe a couple of I'll put you on the spot, but a couple of examples of where you've gone into a company and you can share some success they've had from perhaps the initial problems that you uncovered with them, just to give us a bit of like a case study or something like that you could share an example of perhaps a local company who've
Yeah, of
made
course.
improvements.
Yeah. So I flip back to Tata. Some of those initiatives there is a great example of heavy industry, male dominated, lots of stigma, working class industry. So again, it's about going out and breaking the stigma. It's about asking people what they need, how we support them. For me, the proud one is that well-being hub that we set up in the middle of the workplace, in the middle of the steelworks, where people are telling me nobody would come. And because of the foundations we put in first, within 5 months, 100 people came through those doors. On one group session, which really, makes me really proud of what we did actually, is we had 8 gentlemen sitting in that room discussing their own stories amongst themselves. I just sat back and made the team because they were supporting each other through a really difficult situation of redundancy. And we had 18-year-old apprentices. The guys are 58, 59, facing early retirement because of redundancy. So for me, that was a real success story that we were able to get that many people through. And I suppose another one is with one of my customers now, a very mixed workforce around production. I've delivered 20 briefings in the last 12 months into this workforce, and at the end of every one, somebody has come forward to discuss a personal problem at the end of the session.
Thank you, Martin. There's a chat. Sorry, Mark has put something in the chat. I've just launched our mental health team. We operate a number of wedding venues. One concern I do have is if one of our mental health first aiders was supporting an employee who's also on a performance improvement plan, how do you balance the mental health and also the performance as well? So yeah, I think I can relate to that as well. But it's a tricky one. But let's hear your response.
Thought you were going to put me on the spot. No, I think you've just got to gauge the mental health of where we are with it. From my experience, once you start offering people the support, it's. Can you hear me okay? Are you okay? Can you hear me okay, guys? Yes.
I can. Sorry, Martin. I just had a problem with my headset. I put it back on now, but I can hear you
It's okay.
clearly. Yeah.
So I think we've got to take the mental health as an issue, as it faces us, and then once we start offering the support um, and engage what the response from that, because again, Tata, a lot of people would say people would use it, as playing the card, which I don't like the term, but we know it happens. But once you start offering the support, the guys who are genuine, they're the ones who will seek the support and then follow through with the support. So I think that's where you've got to you've got to you've got to treat it as face value to start, but also you've got to consider, are they safe in a working environment? Are they a risk as well around that? So it is a tricky one.
Yeah, it's tricky and because individual circumstances plays a part as well. You don't know what the actual, perhaps mental health issues they might have. Will
Yeah,
vary from individual to individual. That has to be sort of supported as well as, you've got to do the performance part of it as well. That's just as important as well. But you've got to get that balance correct and make sure the person's definitely supported, but also have to be accountable as well. So there's
yeah, of course, yeah, yeah.
HR teams and specialists in employee matters can advise on that. But thank you. Hopefully, Mark Osborne. Hopefully that answers your question anyway, but gives you a bit of an insight. We have another question there from Sam. Hi. What funding is out there that you're aware of for mental health support for organisations? I think you mentioned some charities earlier, but I wondered if you're aware of any sort of so some small medium companies they should be investing in, but if they know there's a bit of a helping hand there, that might give them a bit of a kickstart or something they can tap into. I know historically we did have some mental health first aid training delivered that was funded by Welsh Government, I believe, but
Yeah.
that was about maybe 3-4 years ago. But I don't know if you're
Yeah.
aware of what's out there at the moment. Perhaps you can shed some light.
Um, I know some of the colleges are offering some sort of discounted training, and then again, charities like Mind or like Samaritans are the good guys to come in to deliver some free sessions around that. But regarding wireless skill, there isn't a huge amount of funding out there. I think approach your local charity, or your local office for your mental health charity is probably the first port of call to offer that support, because they will provide you some training and some support. But again, resources are a struggle, isn't it, for everybody?
Yeah, definitely. But it's funny though when you put the statistics up earlier, it's so much of a positive investment to invest in mental health because in theory, you'd have a much apart from a much happier, more positive
Yeah,
workforce, you'll have less sickness absence days due to mental health reasons, and that all creates
yeah,
a positive culture. It's a cultural change, a lot of it is in some
yeah, huge
organizations,
culture change.
especially you can
Yeah,
imagine Tata Steel as well, especially with all the redundancy they've had there. It's a difficult time for a lot of people when they go through that sort of stress, because they relate it back to how it affects your life, isn't it? People got mortgages to pay and families to
of
support.
course.
It can be
Yeah.
really, really stressful and challenging times. That's definitely going to have a mental health effect. So
100%.
hopefully, Sam, that answers your question regarding some funding out there. I think it's charities and um, offer a lot of advice and support. There's tons of stuff out there if you Google it as well. There's I
Yeah.
know with us we've got designated helplines you can ring and things like that. So um, okay, that was it on the questions. Um, I'm not sure if you've got any more information you can share with us just before we close things up, Martin, on the sort of work that you've been undertaking. And you mentioned earlier the different organisations you've been working with. Do you see a difference in different organisations with the different challenges they have, or is there commonality between them, or is it generally
Yeah, I think that's
similar
both.
issues everyone's receiving?
Yeah, I think the challenges are the type of business, size of business, like I mentioned, and management is senior management is the huge problem. But actually, when you come down to the actual issues within the workforce, there is a huge commonality and a link between them all. Like you say, I've dealt with a senior solicitor in the last couple of weeks, and somebody who's working in a food factory, working permanent night shifts, and the issues are very similar. It's about breaking that. I'm convinced it's about culture and about attitudes more than anything else.
Did you
Because
did you
all
find they
our
had a
problems.
different? Sorry, go on. Sorry, Martin.
No, 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 go on.
I was going to say, did you see a difference in the attitude between different organisations with regards to the management support and commitment and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes the smaller companies, although they may have another budget, they're more supportive because they're closer to the workforce and they become, there's a better relationship between them. So they find themselves, more willing to support than some of the bigger companies, because sometimes you can offer a big EAP, which actually doesn't provide the correct level of support because it's such a big organization. So, yeah, it varies. So I found with some of my smaller companies are far more supportive than the bigger orgs.
yeah. It's like you say, it's that connection they have with individuals. They can see it probably firsthand. Whereas if you're in a large
Yeah,
organisations, it's not a problem they're faced with every day. They don't see some of the challenges people are having, so they're quite removed from the actual.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
suppose it's it's interesting, isn't it? And I suppose with you got large organisations, like I work for a large organisation, they're very
Mm.
mindful of it. But I know they really focus in on looking at the statistics and the sickness absenteeism, the productivity rates, and what they're currently doing, what they can be doing, what's out there as well.
Yeah, of
Some
course, yeah.
it's the understanding, isn't it? And I know having listened to you before and seeing what services you offer, there's a variety of different things, but it comes down to that engagement is a massive part of it, isn't it? And speaking to people, and understanding what's actually happening in your organisation in order to
Yeah.
put something in place to support and
Provide the
improve it.
support, yeah. So again, engagement right to the beginning really helps how we offer the support. And I'm not just saying this because I offer external support. A lot of employees and a lot of workforces now are more comfortable using external support than they would be talking to internal managers. Again, because of the culture inside. I'm not selling Springfield, honestly, but I'm finding that quite a lot. People are more comfortable coming to talk outside the organisation.
Yes, interesting. Well, there's no more questions on the chat bar, so I'll assume that that's the questions for today, but just want to thank you again, Martin, for your insight into mental health and what you've experienced personally and how you've seen the difference. I know you're very passionate and advocate mental health in the workplace, and you can see that comes across in your presentation and the work that you're doing as well. So obviously continue the good work, and thank you for your time today. Really, really
Well,
appreciate
thank you
it.
for the invite.
I know your details. Hopefully I'll have to ask if she's allowed to share the slides, or if you're happy to share
Yeah,
the
of course.
slides with individuals, or at
Yeah.
least your contact details if people want to get in touch. But
Yeah.
okay, if there's no more questions, which I can't see there is, just want to thank you for your time. Thank everybody for joining the call today and the seminar. I hope you found it really interesting, and we'll catch up probably after Christmas now with some more. So we'll keep you posted on some more seminars we're running with some. We identify and put a plan together for next year with different speakers and things. But thank you, Martin, very much, and thank you all
Thank you
for
very much, guys. Thanks for your
participating
time.
today. Take care, all.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.